We'll be reading from the Gospel of Matthew, the 20th chapter, verses 29 through 34 in the NIV translation, and it reads like this. As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet. But they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." And Jesus stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." And Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. This is the word of the Lord.
Well, good evening. My name is Suzy. I'm the teaching pastor here, and it's a joy to be with you tonight. Today marks the first day of December and the first Sunday of Advent, when we count down the weeks until the arrival or the adventus of Jesus, born into our world as a small baby boy. Now, one of the most famous and often quoted verses associated with the Advent and Christmas season is found in Isaiah 9. It reads, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given." To us a child, a baby is born into the world. But not only is a baby born into a world, but that child grows up into a son who is given to us, to the people of Israel, and then to the world. And as I was praying through this Advent sermon series, I kept returning to that phrase, "to us a son is given." And that led me to ask this question: what kind of son has been given to us? This is a common thing when we look at small children or small babies, wonder, what are they going to grow into? What will they be like? And I think we're supposed to ask that same thing at this Christmas time. And this is a similar question to what King Agur asks in Proverbs 30. He says, "Who has gone up to heaven and come down? Whose hands have gathered up the wind? Who has wrapped up the waters in a cloak? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, and what is the name of his son? Surely you know." So what kind of son has been given to us, and what is his name? Well, this Advent, through our sermon series and our weekly devotionals, we will think about what type of son has been given to us by exploring the 3 names given to Jesus during his life and ministry. And those are the Son of David, Son of Man, and Son of God. And what we're going to do each week is we're going to search the scriptures to learn what these titles meant to the prophets who said them, what they meant in the first century Jewish world into which Jesus was born. And then we're going to see how Jesus lived these titles out in clear and surprising ways in the Gospels. And our goal is to answer that deeper question: why is Jesus' arrival as the Son a gift that has been given to us? Why is Christmas truly good news? And so today we're going to turn to our first title, the title used most often by Matthew in his gospel, Jesus as the Son of David. Now, a quick disclaimer, we're going to jump straight into the Old Testament, so be prepared, and there will be lots of scripture, but there's a reason that we're going for that. Also, I just tried to cut as much fluff as I could from this sermon so I could still fit it in 40 minutes, so we're just going to dive straight in. So be prepared. It is, as Pastor Tim said, a Suzy Silk sermon, so here we go. Okay, so first, what does this title, Son of David, mean? Well, to understand that name that was given to Jesus, we have to turn to 2 Samuel chapter 7. And this is when King David, the second king of Israel, is in power. And God is going to make a special promise to him. See, David has finally conquered Jerusalem, and he wants to build a house for God. He wants to build a temple, not just a traveling tent for God's presence to live in. But God responds to him and makes an unconditional covenant with him. And we read these words: "The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will not be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. So this is often referred to by scholars as the Davidic covenant. This is a unique promise that God makes to King David. But as we read, it involves actually a few different promises. First, it's God saying that David is not going to build God's temple, but instead his son will build the temple. That's in verses 12 to 13. Next, we're told that God will establish the throne of his son's kingdom forever. Because though this son will sin, God will not remove his love from him. So unlike Saul, whose dynasty ended, David's dynasty will continue. And finally, this Davidic dynasty, this house and kingdom will endure forever because the throne will be established forever. So here we actually see two parts of this promise. First, there's an immediate promise, right? David's going to have a son who will build a temple in Jerusalem and begin a dynasty. But we also see a future eternal promise that there will be an eternal throne and kingdom in David's name. So as time moves forward, David does have a son, his son Solomon, from Bathsheba, who's going to build the temple for God. And in 2 Chronicles 6, when Solomon builds the temple, he refers back to this promise and said, like, God, you did this thing. But even in that moment, Solomon realizes that the second part of this promise hasn't been fulfilled. And as is predicted, Solomon does sin, right? He doesn't perfectly obey God, and yet God preserves the Davidic dynasty, right? He doesn't remove Saul from power. And actually, the Davidic dynasty is going to last for a few hundred years. Now, after Solomon, we have a mixture of kings, but we start to see this interesting phrase pop up in the historical narratives. Every once in a while, a king is said to have his father is David, right? So it's like he's David's son. So this phrase, his father is David, appears whenever a king is actually like a godly king, right? So it's not just Solomon, but later Asa, Jehoshaphat, Hezekiah, Josiah. So not all of the kings are good, and the kings that are not great kings are called to follow in the ways of their fathers. But those who do worship God and who do lead others in worship, they're said to have David as their father. Now, unfortunately, these kings, although at the time sometimes people, I think, hope that they are the promised one, they all fall short as well. They sin, they don't have an eternal throne, they die, the throne is lost to captivity. And yet, there's still this promise that's lingering in the Jewish mind. And so with time, it becomes clear, both to David and later to the prophets, that the second half of this promise that God has made to David is more than just building the temple, but it's about the coming of a king whose throne and kingdom would be established by God himself, and which would therefore have far-reaching implications, because this king from the line of David would establish God's kingdom in Israel and in the earth. So let me give you a quick overview of some of the most significant psalms and prophecies that cover this concept, the Son of David. So first, Psalm 2, verses 6 to 12. This is an earlier psalm, probably from around the time of David or Solomon. It reads this way: this is God speaking, I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will proclaim the Lord's decree. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery. Therefore, you kings, be wise. Be warned, you rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and celebrate his rule with trembling. Kiss his son, or he will be angry, and your way will lead to your destruction, for his wrath can flare up in a moment. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. So as we read in this psalm, the Lord is going to establish a king that he's chosen on Zion. Zion is the mountain in Jerusalem where both the temple and the palace are located. And this psalm records a conversation between the Lord and a chosen king that he will treat as his son. And this king will not only rule over Israel, but the nations and the ends of the earth. He'll be a king of kings, and he will rule with justice, such that all the kings of the nations are warned to serve him. But the psalm ends by saying, blessed or happy is anyone who takes refuge in him, who, chooses to flee to him from the dangers of the world. Next, we read in Psalm 110. This is a psalm written by David. Jesus tells us that, and it says that in its opening line. A psalm of David. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. Jumping forward, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. So again, this is very early on as a psalm. It's revealed to David, and David records overhearing a conversation between the Lord God and between this Lord or someone else that David considers his master. And those are two different words in the Hebrew. And in the conversation, God tells this person that God will establish his kingdom from Zion, and that this king will not only serve as a king, but also as a priest forever. So this intermediary between God and man, and that this king will judge the nations. Now, moving past the Psalms, Micah, who lives a number of generations later around the time of King Hezekiah, Micah writes these words, "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord." So Micah is saying that the promised ruler, this king, will be born in David's hometown in Bethlehem, and that like David, this king will lead in such a way that he shepherds the people. At the same time as Micah, there's another prophet, Isaiah, who's sent by God to encourage the Davidic dynasty at the time because they're under threat from foreign invaders. And so God gives Isaiah a series of promises that we find in chapters 7, 9, 11, and 16. So in chapter 7, we read that a virgin will give birth to a son who will be called Emmanuel, God with us. In chapter 9, we're told, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this." So again, a son is given. He's going to have all these unusual names, right? Mighty God, Everlasting Father. He's going to have a government and peace that will have no end. He's going to reign on David's throne. And it's the zeal of the Lord that will accomplish this. Then in chapter 11, we read, "A shoot will come out from the stump of Jesse," that's David's father. "From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him." And then jumping forward, "But with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked." We're then told that even the animals themselves begin to live in peace with one another. Until verse 9, "They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And that day the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious." And then in chapter 16, "In love a throne will be established. In faithfulness a man will sit on it, one from the house of David, one who in judging seeks justice and speeds the cause of righteousness." So in these promises from Isaiah, we begin to see that this Davidic son will bring peace and justice on the earth by judging the wicked and by bringing justice for the needy and the poor and the righteous. And that this type of justice will extend to the nations, but also even to the animal kingdom itself. Later prophecies found in Ezekiel would compare this son of David to a shepherd king who will care for the people like a shepherd, searching for the lost, binding up the injured, and strengthening the weak while destroying the sleek and the strong. And later, after Ezekiel, the prophet Zechariah says that this king will not come on a war horse, but will come in meekness and in lowliness. So, as you can see from just a few of these prophecies, throughout the generations, the Jewish people begin to receive from the Lord a more holistic picture, a more detailed description of this promised son of David. And so they begin to refer to the son of David as the anointed one, right? The chosen one, in Hebrew, Mashiach, or Messiah, or in Greek, Christ. So this Messiah from the line of David, we're told, would have an unusual birth. He'd rule as a king from Jerusalem, but his kingdom would extend to the whole earth so that all nations and all creatures would serve him. He would be chosen and appointed by God and called God's son. This king would execute justice on the wicked and on any who oppose God, while also bringing up true justice and righteousness on the earth by tending to his people as a shepherd, healing and binding up the broken, finding the lost and the far away, and that he would come as a king in lowliness and humility himself. So he would build God's eternal house by serving as a priest before the Lord and serving as an intermediary between Israel and humanity and God. And he would teach God's laws and extend God's covenant of justice and mercy, blessing all who take refuge in him. So this is a lot of different promises related to the Son of David. But all of these promises associated with the Son of David are not realized by any of the kings in the first 1,000 years after David. Because even though they might follow in the ways of their father David, they still fall short through sin, and therefore they're not given an eternal kingdom by God. And so by the time the first century comes around, And the people at this point in time don't even have a Jewish, let alone Davidic king on the throne in Jerusalem. We see that they're hoping for the Messiah again. They're longing for the promises of the Son of David, but they haven't been able to find him yet. And so with this context in mind, we now turn to the opening words of the New Testament, and we read this shocking first verse. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, when we know all of this, we begin to realize that Matthew is here making a startling claim. It should shock us. He's saying that after 1,000 years, the promised one, the son of David, has finally arrived, and we know his name. His name is Jesus, which means salvation. So Matthew now is going to go on to explain. He's going to give us proof text. It's one of the reasons I love the book of Matthew. He's going to go step by step and be like, and this is how it was fulfilled, and this is how it was fulfilled. So he's going to go forward, and he's going to tell us about Jesus' unusual birth to a Virgin Mary. He's going to mention how wise men come from the east looking for the one who's born, the King of the Jews, and how they're going to find him in David's hometown of Bethlehem. And over again, he's going to talk about how Jesus' birth fulfills all of the different prophecies. And so from the start, the disciple Matthew in his gospel is making the claim, and he's emphasizing it in various ways. He's making the claim that Jesus is the promised Messiah. He's the son of David and fulfillment of prophecy. And we find this specific title, Son of David, woven throughout the Gospel of Matthew. It's actually one of the major themes as compared to other gospel accounts. And so today, now that we have that context in mind, we're going to turn to the New Testament, and specifically to the book of Matthew, and we're going to try to discover what does this mean when Jesus is called the Son of David. Now, the title Son of David shows up in the following passages in Matthew. Matthew 1, which we've already read, but also chapter 9, 12, 15, 20, 21, and 22, along with other allusions. But this is where people specifically call Jesus the Son of David. Now, when I sat down to study this title and the specific instances when Jesus is referred to as the Son of David, I was actually really surprised. I didn't find what I expected to find. Although I anticipated that this title would be a stand-in for the word Messiah, as we see in Matthew 1, I didn't expect it to mostly arise in narratives related to mercy. In fact, the people who most often called Jesus the Son of David were those who were in need of mercy, because they had been oppressed or alienated by the brokenness of the world. For them, Son of David meant the merciful one. So I want to show you how this shows up and how it functions. So over and over again in Matthew, we see this phrase, Son of David, have mercy. So for Matthew, this is a repeated theme. In the story, a person is going to cry out, Son of David, have mercy. And then Jesus is going to respond with compassion and by answering their request. So let me show you all of the examples that come up. So in Matthew 9, two blind men call out, have mercy on us, Son of David. And they're in a home. And after this, Jesus touches their eyes and he heals them. In Matthew 12, Jesus heals a demon-possessed, blind, and mute man. And those who witness the miracle then wonder if Jesus could be the Son of David. In Matthew 15, a Canaanite woman cries out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. And she does this because her daughter is demon-possessed. And although the disciples try to send her away, she's going to cry out all the more. And this is surprising because this is a non-Jewish woman who believes that Jesus is the promised Messiah and that his miracles are therefore not just for the Jewish people, but also for the Gentiles. And so Jesus commends her faith and heals the daughter. Right after this, Matthew tells us that Jesus goes throughout the Galilee, healing the lame, the blind, the crippled, and the mute, and having mercy and compassion on them. He even finds that they're so hungry that he multiplies bread for them. So from all these examples, we have to conclude that Jesus' ministry is marked by mercy. And those who hear of him and who recognize their need appeal to Jesus as the Son of David. They see that Jesus has come as the humble king the prophets spoke of, a king who would bring justice and who would care for the weak and lame as a shepherd. But not only did this mercy mark his ministry, but this also marked his final week before the crucifixion. In Matthew 20 to 21, Matthew records the events of Palm Sunday. So this is just 5 days before Jesus' crucifixion, and he covers them in a lot of detail. And here we find multiple occurrences of the title Son of David, and we also see Jesus portrayed as the merciful, humble king. So beginning in Matthew 20, verses 29, our teaching text, we read, As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed them. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. Here, as in earlier, Jesus is called out to as the Son of David, and Jesus stops to show compassion and mercy towards those who need healing. And this is important because Jesus is on his way to the climax of his ministry, right? He's about to be arrested and to die on a cross, and yet in the middle of all of that, Jesus is easily interrupted and he stops to show mercy. Next, we read that Jesus enters Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, but he enters it not on a war horse, but humbly riding on a donkey and a colt. And the crowds are going to shout out, "Hosanna to the Son of David." And then they're going to greet him as an ancient Israelite king would be welcomed. "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." After Jesus enters into Jerusalem, he's going to go into the temple courts and he's going to drive out the money changers in the courts, and he's going to say, "My house will be a house of prayer." And once he has emptied the courts of all the money changers, then who gathers around him? We read this: "The blind and the lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did, and the children shouting in the temple courts, 'Hosanna to the Son of David,' they were indignant." So now again, what do we see? The blind and the lame are coming to Jesus, and now also the children are calling him the Son of David. So those who are least in society are the ones who are welcoming him and praising him. Now, it's important to not lose these details when we think about the climax of Jesus' ministry and his final days before his crucifixion. We might ask that question: how did Jesus spend his final days? Well, Matthew would tell us that a significant part of it was given to the disabled, to the sick, to the outcasts, to those in need of mercy, and to some children. The title, Son of David, is in fact not for the powerful, as we might expect, but for those in need of mercy and compassion. And this is why Matthew 20, the healing of the blind men, is such an insightful narrative regarding Jesus' mission and ministry. As Larry Cunard explains, the petition of the 2 blind men thus construes the messianic significance of the title Son of David in terms of a mission of mercy and compassion. Jesus' kingly power and authority are not exercised as the Gentiles do, who love to lord it over, but rather in compassionate service on behalf of others. In fact, the issue of how one understands Jesus' identity and mission as the Son of David becomes a critical point of controversy when Jesus arrives in Jerusalem. In spite of the traumatic events awaiting him in Jerusalem, Jesus is easily moved by the plight of others and responds to alleviate their suffering. That phrase there, that how one understands Jesus' identity and mission as the Son of David, becomes a critical point of controversy. That's so important here, because some will recognize what Jesus is doing and some will not, and it hinges on that idea. What is his mission? What is his identity? Because you see, Jesus as a Messiah didn't come as people expected. He was an unexpected Messiah. He didn't come as a powerful king, like some would have thought. He doesn't come riding in on a war horse and making political alliances. And it's interesting when we look at the time period in the Greco-Roman world where the Jewish people were living, mercy was not actually considered a virtue. Strength and power was what was most highly valued. And so that's how they thought of their kings, not as merciful, but as strong and powerful. And something could be said for our modern culture too. Do we really value mercy in our leaders, or do we value strength and power? Do we think a leader should be spending their time with the disabled and the children and the weak, or spending their time in the war room and making political decisions? But see, Jesus didn't come as anyone expected. He came to care for the sick, the outcasts, all those who've been oppressed by the brokenness of the world. Whether they had been born with a disability because we live in a fallen, sinful world with broken genetics, or whether he came to free the person who was oppressed by demons, or came to bring in the person who came from a culture full of idols and said, yes, I am actually the Messiah for the Gentiles too. or whether it was to minister to people who are thrust to the outskirts of society by human injustice. Jesus tells us over and over again that he didn't come for the healthy, but for those who were sick and who knew their need. In this way, Jesus embodies God's heart as expressed in Hosea 6:6. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. He embodies God's goodness in his name, as God says to Moses on Mount Sinai when he says, my goodness and my name will go before you. God says, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. As Strong's lexicon explain, mercy was a central attribute of God and a key ethical principle. The concept of mercy in the Bible is deeply rooted in the covenant relationship between God and his people, where God's mercy is seen as an expression of his steadfast love and faithfulness. See, mercy, compassion, is what expresses God's goodness. But because not everyone expected a merciful Messiah, or maybe because they thought of themselves as on the right side, not needing help, but also not really deserving God's justice, when people cried out to Jesus as the Son of David, when they said, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on them, so often the masses around Jesus, they resist this cry. We see the disciples turn away the Canaanite woman. She's saying, have mercy. And they want to keep her out of the room because they believe Jesus just had more important things to do in establishing his kingdom. The crowds, they're going to rebuke the blind men. We don't know exactly why. Maybe they saw them as a nuisance, as a distraction. Maybe they were just hardened by hearing roadside beggars cry out all the time that they just didn't even pay attention to them. Over and over again, we see those following Jesus not showing mercy, not feeling like Jesus should be spending his time doing that. And in his final days, we see the leaders are indignant with the children. The scribes are debating with Jesus about his lordship as the Son of David, that when Jesus heals people, he's accused of having a demon. And ultimately, the leaders and the crowd, they will crucify this humble, merciful king. He's not who they expected him to be. See, all these people did not understand the nature of Jesus' kingship and the nature of God's kingdom. They had their own expectations regarding the promised Messiah, the promised Son of David, and so they missed what Jesus had come to do, and they missed the kingdom that he had come to establish. But the two blind beggars, they don't. They cried out to Jesus, they persisted against opposition, they received healing, and they got up and followed Jesus. And we have to ask, why? Why did the blind men truly see Jesus when others did not? Maybe it's because they were aware of their own need. And in desperation, they recognized that the true king who exemplifies God's heart would be merciful. And as I reflected on this text, this is what struck me. Jesus is not always the king we expect, but he is the king that we need. He's the Son of David, given to us as the gift from God that we desperately need, even if we don't know it. And this especially struck me when I put myself in the stories that we've just read. That's always a good practice, right? When you're reading the Bible, you sort of put yourself in the narrative. And I started to see that I could make the same mistakes that the disciples and the crowds made. I could think that Jesus can't be interrupted because he's busy with kingdom work. Like he's got important things to do right now. I can see myself becoming hardened to the cries of the needy since I'm busy with other things. I can see myself thinking that those kids and the needy are a distraction from the things that just have to get done. I can see myself becoming so focused on seeing Jesus up close myself, or seeing his miracles, or wanting to hear his teachings, that I haven't paused to ask who needs help to get to Jesus themselves so they can receive the healing or the mercy that they need. I can see myself in the room listening to Jesus' teaching, and the paralytic is outside and can't get in. I can see myself completely disregarding Jesus' central ministry of mercy, thinking it's just not that important. And I realize that this can happen in part because I always put myself in the shoes of the able-bodied disciples and not in the shoes of the blind beggar who actually have so much faith and belief in Jesus. You see, they too are actually disciples. They're actually believers. But when I read the story, I also other them in my mind. And this is when I'm struck again by how much I actually need Jesus, how I need the Son of David, the merciful one. Because what Jesus says over and over again is that he came for the sinners and not the supposed righteous. He comes for the sick and not those who think they are healthy. He desires mercy and not sacrifice or kingdom work. See, I am in need of mercy myself. I need to be forgiven. I need to be rescued from my self-centeredness, from my I can do it myself mindset, from my false views of Jesus and God. I need to be rescued from my religious indignation and my religious agenda, from my deep, ingrained, since birth, deep spiritual blindness. I, and I think you too, need to recognize how desperately we need Jesus. Not just once, but every day. And then, and only then, we can cry out alongside the beggars and say, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. And maybe, only then, I can be a true follower of Jesus, who begins to look like Jesus, a person who is easily interruptible, even on the most important days, a person who's moved with compassion for those in need and those who are far from God, a person who can actually be Jesus' hands and feet to those who desire his mercy. Maybe I can also be about my Father's business. See, Jesus is the Son and the King that we need. We need not just some, but all the promises associated with the Messiah. We need the full impact of his kingdom to fill the whole earth, but also every single corner of the human heart. We need a king who will keep the unconditional promise given by God to David, unconditional, and that God will do this good work in spite of our brokenness and our sin, who will have mercy on whom he will have mercy. We need a truly good king that executes God's will and not our own will on the earth. We need Jesus to rebuke and correct us when we're wicked, hard-hearted, unbelieving, and indignant. We need Jesus to come in true justice and righteousness, which means humbling the proud and raising up the humble and the weak. We need a king who does not cater to the powerful, but spends his time with the weak, the outcast, and the children. We need the merciful Son of David to do what no other human king has ever done. We need him to embody God's goodness and bring God's kingdom. And this is the good news of Christmas. The promised Son of David has come, and he's come to bring God's mercy. And so maybe you're here today and you recognize your need. You see that you need Jesus' forgiveness. You need Jesus' healing. You need Jesus' restoration in your life. Well, good news, the Son of David is here. Or maybe you're here today, and as you're listening, you're recognizing that when you think about Jesus, you often discount his mercy, or you apply it to yourself but not to others in your life. Maybe somewhere along the way, you've believed the lie that God helps those who help themselves. And therefore, you've discounted the central part of God's character, his mercy, his compassion. And if this is you, Jesus, in the best way, wants to rebuke and correct your way of thinking. He wants to change you and then invite you to join him in his plans, not your own. So in short, we all need to receive mercy, and we all need to then join Jesus in his mercy ministry. Like the blind men, we can cry out for mercy, receive healing, and then follow him. So as we close out this first Sunday of Advent, I believe that Matthew 20 and similar texts leave us with three options in how we can interact with Jesus. We can oppose him, we can use him, or we can cry out and follow him. As we see in the text, there are many who actually oppose Jesus, and the same can be true for us. Sometimes our expectations regarding who God is and what he desires to do in the world position us to oppose Jesus. Right? We start to not believe who he says he is. We don't agree with his teachings and his agenda. Maybe we even deconstruct our faith and we throw out portions of the Bible. What we're really doing is we're starting to remake Jesus into a new person that feels more palatable and manageable to us. And in the end, we start to look for another Messiah, other than Jesus. So whether we realize this or not, this can be a trap for all of us, even those of us who call ourselves Christians. We can sometimes say, this isn't the Jesus that I think I believe in. This Bible is confronting some part of me. I'm not sure I like that. And we just pick and choose. We just say, oh, we'll get rid of this part of Jesus and keep this part of Jesus. And over time, we create a new Jesus that looks like the Messiah we wish had come. And this is called deconstructing. And all of us have to be honest about that. And we have to say, who do we say that Jesus is? Is it who he says he is? Is it who the Bible says that he is? Have we received the true Messiah? So we can oppose Jesus. I think we can also fall into the trap of using Jesus. Like the crowds or even the disciples at times, I think all of us can default to using Jesus for his power, his miracles, his associations. Using Jesus can happen when we care more about seeing a miracle than we do about the people who need the miracle. Using Jesus can happen when we care more about associating with a successful Christian person or ministry than we do about the people who need to be served by that ministry. Using Jesus can happen when we react like the disciples and the crowds to interruptions and cries for mercy, when people need help and we see it as a distraction, as a nuisance from the real business. These are all the times when mercy or evangelism seem like distractions from the real work. When we think of healing and praying and serving and loving and sharing the gospel as not nearly as important, maybe as even our own walk and work with Jesus. In short, using Jesus happens when we become more self-centered than kingdom-minded. And it's very easy to slip into this trap. We can walk alongside Jesus thinking we know where we're headed. And then because of our own agenda, we are walking along and suddenly realize Jesus is no longer with us. This has happened to me before. And we look back and Jesus is about his Father's business. Like, I thought we were going this way, Jesus, and he's just gotten interrupted. Like, why are we going down this detour? This is not the strategic plan, Jesus. But that's because we've been using him. Somewhere along the way, we got so excited about the place we were going, we forgot to pay attention to the person and what he was doing. So we've been using him. But there's a third option. We can cry out and we can follow him. Every single one of us are spiritually blind. We're all guilty. We're all guilty of sin. And some of us also need the help of a merciful one because we felt beaten down by the brokenness and injustice of the world. But here's the good news. Jesus hears the cries of the weak. So when we cry out to him, he will restore us. He will forgive us. He will heal us, and he will invite us to follow him once again. He will shepherd his sheep. So today, if you hear Jesus passing by, cry out to Jesus to stop and to heal you. Psalm 95:7 says, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts." If you hear him. Anthony Saldarini says, "The blind men symbolize the faith and sight and understanding appropriate to followers of Jesus. Their response encapsulates the proper attitude and behavior of a disciple of Jesus, and their following propels the narrative towards the completion of the journey to Jerusalem." So they symbolize the faith that's appropriate for a follower of Jesus. So when you recognize your need, and that can be a need to be forgiven, or it can just be a simple need. God, I'm broken, I'm oppressed, I feel far from you. Cry out to him. But I need to warn you, this crying out and following after Jesus, it requires an act of faith. It's a willingness to persist despite opposition, because the world will try to rebuke your faith. Sometimes other Christians will too. Augustine of Hippo, the ancient church father, he even warns that the world will try to silence your cries just as it did those blind men. The world will try to persecute you for following Jesus. But brothers and sisters, press on. Do not let other people prevent you from inheriting the promised Messiah and from standing and seeing the Lord. So, as we close our time, I want to lead us in a time of response. If you're here today and you need mercy, or you want to see Jesus even just for the first time for who he truly is, now is the time to respond. I want to encourage you to cry out to the Lord in prayer. And so I'll lead us in a time of response. And if you've never encountered Jesus before, today is your invitation. If you hear his voice, if you sense a longing for his leadership, you can turn and cry out for mercy. And maybe you're here today and you've been following Lord for a long time, but you've recognized that you have started remaking him in your own image, or you've gotten distracted by the things of this world. You can cry out to him for mercy, and he will heal you and invite you to follow him once more. So let's respond in prayer. Jesus, thank you. Thank you that you are the Son of David. Thank you that you are the promised one. Thank you that you are the merciful one who has compassion on us. For some of us here in this room, Lord, we've never turned in response to you before. But God, we sense your presence. We hear you coming. And so we say, Lord, have mercy on us. Jesus, we are sinful. We are far from you. We are spiritually blind. Jesus, come and touch us. Heal us. Help us to see you for the very first time. To see you for the good King, the promised King. And Jesus, as we gather as your people in this room, your sheep, we recognize, God, that so often we have gone our own way. We've been distracted by the world. We've forgotten your heart for mercy. We've discounted the cries of the needy. We haven't shared our faith. Jesus, have mercy on us. Heal us, forgive us. Invite us to follow you once again. Rebuke us, correct us, change the parts of our heart where we are not like you. And Lord, I lift up our church community to you right now, God. Lord, we want to be a people who seeks your presence, who seeks your face. And Lord, when you gathered in the temple, it was the blind, the lame, the children that were around you. Would you make us a church that's marked by mercy? Would you make us a place where those who are far from you come near to you, Lord? Would you make us a place where those who are in need of mercy and need of healing can have easy access to you, Jesus? Jesus, help us to join you in your ministry of mercy and compassion. I pray this in your precious and holy name. Amen. Friends, we're going to continue in a time of prayer and worship. Our prayer team is going to be down here at the front. If you just made a decision to follow Jesus, we'd love to talk to you and pray for you. And we have a gift for you at the back. If you're somebody who has just rededicated your life to the Lord after a long time away, we'd love to talk to you, encourage you, pray for you, and give you a gift. Maybe you're here tonight and you just need to spend some time repenting. You can do that in your seats, but we'd also love to pray for you at the front. And maybe you're here today and you just need God's healing. When you read that story, you're like, I am the blind beggar. I'm the lame. I am the mute. I need deliverance. Lord, if that's you and you're just crying out to the Lord for that, we'd love to pray with you. We'd love to intercede with you. And also, as we say here, if there's some reason that you can't come forward, you feel uncomfortable, you're not able to, please just raise your hand and one of our ushers will help direct a prayer person back towards you. We want you to receive prayer if that's what you need tonight. So with that, let's respond, stand, sit, come forward, however the Lord leads you. Let's respond.
Holy Father, there is nothing I have that you have not given me.
All I have and am belong to you, bought with the blood of Jesus.
To spend everything on myself and to give without sacrifice.
Is the way of the world that you cannot abide.
Each week, we recite a generosity liturgy to form our hearts out of the way of the world and into the way of Jesus. And each year, we ask our church not to simply say the liturgy, but to live the liturgy out, to be determined and to actually increase in generosity until there are no needy persons amongst us. And we're excited for all that we are praying for with this year's Living the Liturgy campaign. And we need you to be a part of us and join what God is doing in our church. We have got to build a sense of vocational mission. A lot of times we hear feedback that you come to church and you love hearing God's word being taught, you love worshiping together, but then all of a sudden you walk back into work and it can feel like these things do not fit together. What happens on Sunday struggles to connect with what it is that you do all week. And so for this reason, we are really committed to helping people figure out how their faith intersects with their work. You can't make disciples of Jesus in New York if you do not include the workplace. Because that's why most people come to New York. They come for their jobs. You don't just accidentally wake up in Manhattan. It's just too expensive and too challenging for just a little bit of fun. Most people come with education, ambition, vision, and clarity about what they want to do. But those people often have more education than theological formation, and they have more ambition than they do godly direction. And so we want to build a discipleship pathway that helps people integrate the Lordship of Jesus with what they do in the real world all week long. And we are committed to creating world-class resources to help this actually happen. We want to provide proven mentors in their fields, getting together with people in our church to give them advice and direction on their careers. We want to see this happen with finance, education, government, the arts, every sphere that makes our city great. And can you imagine what would happen if people across these different spheres got together and push a vision of redemption through the industries that we love that make our city great? We are excited about building a center for vocational mission and the work God is going to do through you in our city because of what we build together. The foundations of the next decades of ministry here in this city are being laid right now, and the future of our church is being built into that foundation. God's doing something beautiful. We don't want you to miss out on it, and we need your help to make it a reality. So consider praying and giving to Living the Liturgy this year.